You are on the brink. You are on the brink. You are on the brink.
Welcome to DoubleThink, conversations inspired by Season 1 of This Is Propaganda. If you haven't already listened to Season 1, you should start there. It's on the same podcast feed as this, and it's 5 episodes long, it's all scripted, and it examines how propaganda has molded the society we live in. If you're here, you'll like it, I promise. If you already listened to it, congratulations. Welcome to the Inner Sanctum. Enjoy this conversational podcast episode. Hollywood and the Department of Defense have been working together really since Hollywood started. But after the Vietnam War, the stories that they were telling together started to change. As more money gets put toward defense spending, the actual weapons become more and more technologically advanced. And over time, America starts kind of having a monopoly on certain objects, like aircraft carriers are a great example of this. F-18 fighter jets, certain types of tanks, and obviously just certain types of locations. The United States military slowly building this insane war chest of technology and props and equipment and locations ends up creating what today is referred to as the military entertainment complex. The weapons and tools that the military is using become so expensive that if you want to tell modern narratives around war, there's really only one entity on Earth that has the equipment and locations you need, and it's the US military. In exchange for access to otherwise unaffordable props and set pieces, the Pentagon gets an active seat at the table when it comes to one of the most powerful public relations tools on Earth, the Hollywood system. Producers who want to use military equipment or locations need to submit their movie's script to the Department of Defense for vetting, and the ultimate result is that the Pentagon has a say in every US movie made that uses their resources. Overtly critical anti-war films like Apocalypse Now or The Deer Hunter become increasingly rare, being replaced with the likes of Top Gun or The Hunt for Red October. And beyond films that are overtly about wars and the soldiers fighting them, the technology created by the military-industrial complex began to underpin major franchises, from Transformers all the way to Pitch Perfect. The man behind this change was named Phil Strubb. He was the head of the Pentagon's Hollywood Liaison Office from 1997 to 2016, and in that time he became the most thanked person in Hollywood. We really wanted to do a full scripted episode about Phil Strubb and the Hollywood Liaison Office, but the more we kept digging into the research behind it, the more we kept running into this one guy, Tom Secker. Tom is an investigative journalist, he's an author, he's a documentary producer, he's behind the website spyculture.com, the film Theaters of War, and the book National Security Cinema. And really, ultimately, we were not able to find anything particularly new or compelling to say about this topic that Tom Secker hasn't already said, probably better than we could. So we ended up just wanting to have him on as a guest and have a conversation. The following is that conversation. Yeah. So I guess at a high level, my first question about this process would be, the American Pentagon in general is an entity with roughly an $800 billion a year budget. Let's say that I want to make the Barbie movie with Mattel, right? But or the iPhone movie, the movie about the creation of the iPhone. They're gonna be this up my ass. If I make the iPhone movie, right, and I want to shoot on all their locations and I want to use the story of Apple, they're gonna be in the script, they're gonna be on set, they're gonna be in the editing bay. Why is it? What are the cons, or what do you see as the negatives of the Pentagon doing this versus Mattel for Barbie or Apple for the iPhone?
The different thing is, if you go to Apple and you want to shoot at Apple's headquarters and they say no, you can find somewhere else. You can just find another tech company headquarters or other corporate headquarters that looks all fancy and modern and, has some kind of visual resemblance to the Apple headquarters, and you can just film there. And that happens quite a lot, that people are turned down for a certain location. With the military, okay, you might be able to get some luck from a different branch of the military. You might be able to go abroad and get their military assets. If you need F-22s, say, you go find another country that has some. You need a submarine, you go find another country that has one.
Sure.
But sometimes they won't have any, and sometimes they won't be available. And that's more expensive because then you have to go and shoot overseas. And it's more complicated as well, administratively and organizationally. So it's much, much easier to just use the one in California that's only 20 miles from your studio, right? And that's the difference, is that the military has a monopoly on certain things. There are only so many aircraft carriers in the world. If you want to shoot Top Gun or Top Gun Maverick, you need your aircraft carriers, you need your aircraft, you need your pilots, you need all of that. there aren't that many countries that have a spare aircraft carrier just sitting around, because there aren't any other countries that have an $800 billion annual budget for the military. So, I mean, I think we have one in this country. So the chances of you being able to get access to that particular one isn't very high. The US has a lot more than just one. So they have not only far more of these assets, they also have a comparative monopoly on them. There are certain things that only the military has, whereas a corporate headquarters or a laboratory where you're developing an iPhone or whatever it is that you need as your set, there are other options.
Yeah, I mean, very well said. I feel like if you have a script and it's about American war, post pretty much like Vietnam, right? Like the Cold War era, there are certain technologies that just simply aren't accessible to you unless the US military is willing to play ball. And they're going to be accessible to you if the military is willing to play ball at such a profoundly discounted cost that the incentives for the studios and producers lie with getting the military to approve of an idea. And that kind of creates this ADBC that I feel like Top Gun does kind of sit at the center of. Can you tell me about, from your perspective, Department of Defense Entertainment Office pre-Top Gun, Department of Defense Office post-Top Gun, what changes?
Okay, so in the 50s and 60s, Hollywood was making approximately 20 war movies a year, mostly World War II films, mostly set in the Pacific Theater. Then things start to change. Vietnam happens and rapidly starts going badly, badly wrong, and becomes a very unpopular war pretty quickly. So the appetite from American audiences and international audiences more generally for these conventional rootin' tootin' hoorah kind of positive war movies is declining. The film The Green Berets, the John Wayne one, which was specifically made for the purposes of advertising and promoting the Vietnam War, was actually not very commercially successful. So that starts happening. You get the rise of more independent studios in Hollywood, the decline of the Big Five, and the rise of filmmakers like Spielberg and Coppola and Scorsese, the movie brats generation, who often founded their own studios so they could make their own films outside of the financial chicanery of the big studio system. You also get the decline of the MPAA's production code, which was very strict. It said you cannot put certain things in your movie, and a lot of this related to violence. Well, if you're making a war movie and you want to actually depict violence, you want to depict what it's really like, you want to show the gore and the suffering and the horror and the trauma afterwards and that kind of thing, the production code basically forbid you from doing that until the 60s. But then that declines and you get the rise of the age ratings classification system. So now you can make films for children, but you can make films that are only for adults, and there's different criteria for each one. So basically, you can make a different kind of war film. And that's why you see in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, war films that were not like those ones they were making in the late 40s to mid 60s period. And as a result, the Pentagon's kind of screwed, really, in its relationship with Hollywood, because it's like everything was going so well. Hollywood's churning out, 15, 20 war movies a year. We're working on pretty much all of them. This is great. This is exactly what we're set up to do. This is exactly what we want. Then suddenly things start to change. People's attitude towards war and war movies in particular is changing. The market isn't there anymore. What do we do? And one of the things they actually started doing was pitching Hollywood quite aggressively. And you could argue this is one of the places where Top Gun comes from, is from the military saying to Hollywood, we want to make different kinds of military films. We want to make ones that aren't so focused on violence and combat, but tell stories of military characters. And when you look at that first Top Gun movie, that's what it is. Yeah, it's a military film. Almost everyone in it is a military character or is working for the military in some way. And yet there's hardly any combat. There's hardly any violence. There's hardly any death. There's hardly any of the usual things you would associate with a military-supported film. And so that represents the moment, I think, that it really shifted, that now you have a different kind of military movie you can make that isn't really focused about war. It's about military people themselves. We're no longer making 10, 15, 20 war movies a year. We're still trying to make, 10, 12 movies a year with Hollywood, but we're making more romantic dramas and comedies and maybe spy movies.
That's my question, I guess. If the thesis here is that the US military is able to have such a stranglehold on Hollywood because they have a fundamental monopoly on aircraft carriers. When I started digging into this, what I was shocked by was the Department of Defense has their fingers on, throughout the Jurassic Park 3, Batman and Robin, Silence of the Lambs, Meet the Fockers. Like, how deep the roots go within Hollywood was what really, really surprised me. There's nothing, it's interesting, but it's not particularly profound that the U.S. military was involved in Top Gun. What's interesting to me is that the U.S. military is involved, down to dialogue rewrites on Pitch Perfect 3. What is that process? How do we get from I own all the aircraft carriers, so if you want to make a cool Tom Cruise movie about F-18s, you gotta talk to me, to I'm handing you dialogue rewrites on Pitch Perfect 3 jokes?
That's the part of it that troubles me, is that these seemingly very innocent products, because you might expect them to be in a Transformers movie, like you say. You might expect them, Saving Private Ryan, Black Hawk Down, Pearl Harbor. Those sorts of films are fairly obviously supported by the military. You don't even have to check the credits. But who is watching a Hallmark Christmas movie and thinking this is somehow military propaganda? Their defenses are way down when they're watching something like that, especially since it's largely watched by, I'm not trying to be rude, but single women at Christmas who are sat there half cut, And I'm not, like I say, not trying to be insulting. It's just that's who those movies are aimed at. That's who they're distributed to. So that's who watches them. Yeah. Well, those women aren't sat there thinking I'm somehow getting some military messaging about the sexualization of the military man and how attractive I'm supposed to find him and all this kind of stuff. They're not anticipating it, so their defenses are down, and they're much more likely to internalize that stuff. With Pitch Perfect 3 in particular, the origin of that film, it's that one of the producers was invited on a USO tour and went out to Djibouti and a couple of other places and met with Marines and soldiers who were stationed out there, and they did some, glad handing and a bit of whatever. And that's where the idea for the military involvement in that film came from. So this is something that I don't think the military planned it out that way, but this is one of the reasons why they do these things and why they get the USO involved with celebrities in order to get access to the military and chum up with these celebrities. It's so that they then go back to America and they think, oh, maybe I could make a movie that's in some way based on this experience. Oh, I quite like that guy that I met in Yemen. Maybe I could incorporate a character like that into the next movie I write. And so because they have this, it's not just the monopoly on aircraft carriers, it's the fact that they've had a huge role to play in government PR overall for so long, for decades, over a century, really, that they've created an entire culture out of which comes films like Pitch Perfect 3. Because the other thing to say about that film is no one asked for another film. No one asked for a third Pitch Perfect movie. The first two were very successful and popular, but it's not like audiences were clamoring saying you've got to make a third one of these. So on the one hand, you have Hollywood studios making gratuitous sequels and not having many ideas left for what to fill those gratuitous sequels with. And then you have the military stepping into that void and saying, come film on an Air Force base in Spain.
Well, yeah, to me, it's this weird, continual feedback loop of there's the economic financial incentives for studios and producers to ask, hey, screenwriter, put the military in your script. We can go shoot on aircraft carriers. It's going to be huge production value. Audiences respond to it being in movies, so that incentivizes people to put it into more scripts, which requires them to get more approval from the U.S. government to shoot on more aircraft carriers, and it just snowballs, right? And then the end result is this, on the Top Gun side of things, I think a deeply warped perspective within the American public of what the U.S. military does and how people see the U.S. military abroad, how we're perceived by the larger, human population of the Earth. And then on the most innocuous front of Pitch Perfect 3 reality TV, you have this very slow manufacturing of consent where people are fundamentally unaware it's happening.
Yeah, and they're quite conscious about this. That's the other thing to say, is that this isn't us speculating about their mindset. When you read their documents, they explicitly say things like, having this technology in this movie will essentially help justify the budget. It'll help show off how advanced we are and how prepared we are. And being involved in this reality TV cooking show that is mostly aimed at young women, that will help us reach a demographic we don't normally do, which helps broaden understanding and advocacy, i.e. get more people to like the military and support the military and think, oh, it's okay if my son joins, okay if my daughter joins the military. All of these sorts of things are explicitly in their mindset. That's explicitly their strategy and what they're trying to do and what they are actually doing. I just wanted to make that point, that we are actually commenting on what they're doing. We are not making this up in any way, just inside our own heads.
Sure, it's not a hypothetical of maybe this is the case. You can read the emails, you can read the documentation that I mean, a large amount of which you've worked to get declassified, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk people through, like, why is it so hard to find out whether or not the Department of Defense had something to do with Cake Boss or not? What's the process that you've been having to go through to actually get access to this information, where as a journalist you can say, I did my due diligence, here's the fundamental evidence, this isn't speculative?
An awful lot of reading, essentially. I've read a lot of books, read a lot of interviews, news articles, wherever any of these military entertainment liaison officers or others from other agencies are interviewed, I'm reading it. But also I filed an awful lot of FOIA requests, hundreds and hundreds of them on this topic, and I read everything that came back.
You're having to process Freedom of Information requests because it's not required at all, right? Like, if the Department of Defense was involved in the new Godzilla movie down to punching up dialogue in the script, there is no expectation that in the credits they mention this or any transparency. So you're having to process FOIA requests. And then from what I understand, like, if I submitted a Freedom of Information request on Shrek 2, sometimes it's taken you up to 8 years to get those back, right?
Yes. I have ones that are still pending from the mid-2010s, yes. From even before I wrote National Security Cinema, which came out in the summer of 2017, the book I wrote with Matt Alford. Yeah. I still have requests from that period that I haven't had answers to yet.
Doubling back to, I guess, there's Top Gun kind of represents this shift from, hey, we're making traditional war movies. We are obviously have a vested interest in perception management, but also fundamental, like, accuracy of how the U.S. military is portrayed during war, to Top Gun being, a post-war war film. They're not actively at war at all. It's more about the vibe of being a pilot and how cool and sexy the U.S. military is. You can pretty clearly track that through the 90s, right? And through the 90s, sort of this deepening of now the Department of Defense is consulting on Batman and Robin and Silence of the Lambs and not just Black Hawk Down. Then, as with most things that we talk about in the time that I've been alive as a millennial, 9/11 happens and things change. What do you see as the fundamental marking points of what shifts coming out of 9/11 when it comes to the DoD's participation in Hollywood projects?
Well, by this point, we're seeing the real decline of the war movie. If you look at how many films were actually made about Vietnam compared to how many films were made about Iraq or Afghanistan, Hollywood made far fewer films about those wars, the later ones, the post 9/11 wars. And so they had to move into new areas. They had to move into alien invasion movies, superhero movies. It's in the early to mid 2000s that they get really involved in reality TV. Things changed quite a lot in the early to mid 2000s period. They were on the lookout for emerging popular genres, both in TV and film, and opportunities to get themselves involved in that. And obviously requests coming in from those producers, they were much more likely to consider them positively because it's an opportunity to reach audiences that A, they don't normally reach, and B, in a way they don't normally reach them.
Yeah. The way they don't normally reach them, I think, is like so central to all of this, right? And it's kind of interesting because if post 9/11 the propaganda they're involved in helping to create within the Hollywood system kind of splits into, let's say for the sake of shorthand, like Transformers, Iron Man, and then reality TV. On the Transformers, Iron Man side of stuff, it feels like they shift their goals from, instead of we need to be portrayed in a certain light, we need to make sure that the US military looks good, always look like winners, to instead of like obfuscating the negatives, we're going to normalize them. Right? Like it makes me think of the like the Iron Man 1 especially, where like Robert Downey Jr. is like openly in the Middle East, just like peddling incredibly like peddling missiles that like cause like children to get shrapnel in their lungs and shit. And it's, instead of us not being like, no, don't look at that, we're not going to acknowledge that. It's like, yeah, this is the gig. This is how it works. Let's just make it normalized through this media. And then on the reality TV side of stuff, they still have this really puritanical moral code, right?
Often,
like I saw something, I think it was from you, of them not wanting, like a military wife on wife swap, because it made people think too much about the idea of like infidelity while they're deployed abroad. And so there still is this very like traditionally puritanical, we have to depict the military in this specific light, but that shifts over to all the reality stuff.
I think you're right, yes, that they're either normalizing or they're at least opening the door to that kind of possibility, that kind of story beat, that kind of emotional beat in a film. Whereas for the, if you like, low-grade entertainment, the low culture of mass-produced reality TV, it was like, no, we're still being very strict with this. It is also because, like I say, it was an emerging genre, and they were well aware of how manipulative reality TV is. In their directive, they explicitly talk about how this genre manufactures situations, produces situations which appear to be organic. And that is actually one of the definitions that they use for reality TV. So they knew full well what they were getting involved in. They knew full well that what we're watching on screen in Wife Swap or X Factor or whatever it is something that has been carefully produced and curated. These aren't just, they've turned a bunch of cameras on people and people did some stuff. And that's how they try and make it look, but that's not what's going on. And so I think they also knew that because reality TV producers are quite two-faced and manipulative and will say and do just about anything in order to get the footage they want, they had to be a little bit more puritanical and censorial, I guess.
Sure.
But you're right. Those messages, certainly those, if you like, morally conservative messages that you get, dominated a lot of the reality TV they were working on at that time. Whereas in films, they were getting a bit more free and easy.
I wonder how much also this has to do with, and I guess maybe some of this is Monday morning quarterbacking of like looking back on history and then knowing where it ends up, right? But like, again, taking like the military aircraft carrier, if you want to shoot Top Gun, you got to get them to play ball or else you can't really even make it. That stranglehold on resources is arguably over, will certainly be over by this decade. Like the stuff you can do with basic Unreal technology, psych walls now, makes it where you can shoot on an aircraft carrier, like on the top of an aircraft carrier in a photorealistic way for a fairly low cost. It's increasingly feasible. And I wonder if part of that is, you know, most technology is pushed ahead by the military industrial complex. It's not unthinkable to think that they would be aware of the fact that CGI is going to threaten this.
Okay, so a lot of this, what is generically called AI generative imagery or deep fakes or what have you, actually came out of a US Army funded research lab, the Institute for Creative Technologies. They've actually been the ones pushing forward a lot of this technology that is now, as you say, somewhat usurping the hardware monopoly that the Pentagon has. The thing is, though, it isn't just the hardware that they have to offer. And it's not just things like uniformed extras either. It's access to historians. It's access to subject matter experts for interviews in documentaries. It's the expertise and the storytelling of the military. And so I think while the actual production value that they're able to offer filmmakers, I think you're right about that. that is now threatened by the fact that you can just replace a lot of that physical production value with some form of computer-generated imagery. All the other things they have to offer, not so much. Because, just to take one example, one of the things that they've been pitching to Hollywood is emerging technologies. They go to trade shows, military trade shows, which are full of military industrial companies who are ultimately trying to sell their products to the military. It's not just the acquisitions people who turn up at those trade shows, it's the entertainment liaison office. They're going there to see, what might we be using in the military in 5 or 10 years' time, and can we pitch that to movie producers now? Now, movie producers ain't going to know about this stuff. They don't have researchers wandering around military trade. I don't think they do anyway. They don't go to those sorts of places, so they don't know about that stuff. And so the cutting edge, even if you're ultimately going to depict that through CGI, simply knowing about it is the added production value.
Totally.
So I think they're more going down that kind of a route. I mean, it's the same thing with video games. How are they so prominently involved in video games when they're not really providing much physically to them at all? And yet they are involved. They provide technical advisors to them all the time. There is a whole industry of ex-military people working as technical advisors on Call of Duty games and so on. So they'll find a way. They'll just have to do it a bit differently.
Totally. Well, and I think, part of my argument was like, if you had the foresight to figure that out, reality TV seems like such an incredibly smart place to start really, really investing, because that, by the basis of reality TV's premise, it's kind of unreplaceable. Like the idea is just that you're capturing unscripted moments with human beings, right? That's going to be really, really difficult to replace through technology on a baseline level. It's a much more evergreen position to take.
The other thing about reality TV, of course, is that it's cheap. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why they make so much of it. It's because it's goddamn cheap to make. And so they don't have the money to go out and start CGIing themselves an aircraft carrier. They still need the aircraft carrier because they can't get it anywhere else. Sure, for the $200 million blockbuster Hollywood movie, that's a different financial equation. So, yeah, when it comes to those sorts of things, and this is actually what you're seeing in the last several years already, is that they are working on less blockbuster films, less of those $200-300 million super expensive films, and they're working on a lot more of the $10 to $20 million Netflix movie because, again, they don't have the money to CGI everything, whereas Spider-Man 17, the multiverse of nonsense, does have that kind of money. And so we're seeing a lot more. In fact, Netflix is just like jammed full of CIA and DoD supported content these days. It's probably the premier place for finding that stuff now.
The craziest thing to me about this that really puts a cap on how pernicious it is, or just how widespread it is, right, inside of American film, how much the military-industrial complex has its fingerprints on American films. I went to film school. I have been an avid film lover my entire life.
Me too. In
like the mid 2010s, I did my best to catalog every single film I've ever seen. That number is around like 2,100, 2,300 movies from what we know, which isn't everything, right? It's just the stuff that you and other people have been able to like process freedom of information requests around, stuff that's like so old that it doesn't matter. They can say, yeah, in the 1930s we did that. From what we know today, over 2,500 films and TV shows have been actively, made in collaboration with the CIA and the Department of Defense, which means that as someone who went to film school and works in media, they could have made every single thing I've ever seen.
That's the thing. I have spent much of the last 12, 13 years of my life watching an enormous amount of this material in terms of film and TV. The reality is, if you took all of the media, or at least entertainment media, that you've consumed in your life, it probably amounts to less hours than just the CIA and DoD have supported. And that's not including DEA, FBI, Homeland Security, NASA, NYPD, LAPD, so on and so on and so on. All these other agencies, let alone the British government, the French government, Israeli government, German government, Pakistani government, India, all these different Chinese government, they've all had a big role to some extent in
Sure.
both domestic productions in those countries and to a certain extent on ones that have distributed in your country and that you will have seen. I mean, the Bond films, for example, are British-American co-productions for the most part. So they get involved with both the British and American governments and quite often other governments too.
Looking ahead, or equipping people who are listening to this with something actionable, right? What can people be doing for themselves, I guess, to start? What would you recommend if I were someone who was just out here on Netflix consuming? What can I do to feel slightly more savvy or slightly more aware of whether or not the military is trying to manufacture consent with me through is this cake or not?
The first thing to always keep in mind is that you will have more than one reaction to something. You're allowed more than one reaction to something. You can think more than one thing at once. You can feel more than one thing at once. You don't have to hate something just because it has some element of corporate or governmental propaganda in it. Because frankly, most entertainment does. Perhaps all entertainment ultimately does. And so, unless you're just going to switch the whole thing off, which most of us don't want to do because we actually enjoy this stuff, keep enjoying it. That's the first thing. Don't worry about that you're somehow having the wrong emotional reaction to the film or TV show that you're watching. If you want to watch Cake Boss, Cupcake Wars, whatever, go watch it. I'm not in any way telling people they shouldn't. But keep in mind that the only way they can get the access that they're getting in the episodes of these shows where you blatantly see CIA headquarters or a Marine Corps base or something, they can only get that by compromising the content, which means there will be something in those episodes, and possibly other episodes too, that is some kind of messaging, some kind of perception management, some kind of manipulation. So as with everything, everything that's manipulative, advertising is manipulative, loads of stuff is manipulative, people are fundamentally. So kind of have the same approach to that. There can be people who you work with who you actually quite like in terms of their personality, but sometimes they do bullshit you and lie to you and try to get you to do stuff for them that you're not really interested in doing. It happens. This is life. This is the human race. The only way to deal with that is to have good recognition of it, that it can happen, and to be alert to it happening, and to assert your boundaries. And that means, in those instances, it's asserting your boundaries with other people. In the case of something like this, where it's watching a film or TV show, it's asserting those boundaries with yourself. So you can watch How to Look Good Naked, and you can enjoy it. But as soon as it starts telling you something about the military or America's role in the world or how you should feel about foreigners or something like that, that's when you should, a little bit of spidey sense goes off. And you start to go, no, I'm going to set a boundary with myself there. I'm not going to internalize that part of it. I'll enjoy the rest of the show, but not that bit.
To learn more about Tom's work, head over to spyculture.com. From there, you can check out his books, his movies, everything else. This has been DoubleThink, a production of Brink. Learn more about us by heading to brink.com.